Henry Moore was an English artist known for his semi-abstract bronze sculptures which are around the world as public works of art. His sculptures are usually abstract versions of the human figure. His most prominent ones are of a mother and child or reclining figures. Moore's work are usually suggestive of the female body. In a time where feminism and the Me Too movement are on the rise, I wanted to look more into this representation of women way before these movements to find out, are Henry Moore's sculpture a true representation of the female form? Henry Moore was born in Yorkshire. He began to model in clay and wood from a young age, and after hearing about Michelangelo, he knew he wanted to be a sculptor. However, Moore was conscripted in World War I and was injured in a gas attack. After the war, he received an ex-serviceman's grant and went to study at Leeds School of Art. In 1921, he won a scholarship to study in London and also a travel scholarship where he saw Michelangelo in Italy as well as the Shackmole, a reclining form which influenced his work. Once in London, Moore visited the British Museum and was interested in African and Asian art, and also Sumerian sculpture, a form which can be seen in his work. As he develops, we can see him being influenced by other great artists like Picasso. At the outbreak of the Second World War, Moore was conscripted as a war artist. Here he focused on the people of the underground tube shelters, and we see a turn towards more figurative drawings, drawing off and for the people. After the war, his home in London was bombed and he had to move out with his family. He moved to Hertfordshire to a place called Perry Green. Once at Perry Green, Moore gained multiple commissions as he became well known and gained wealth. He set up the Henry Moore Foundation to continue the appreciation of the visual arts, and his sculpture, which still runs at Perry Green today. I'm here at Perry Green, Hertfordshire, which is Henry Moore's house and studios. He moved here after the war with his wife. It started out as a cottage and now is a 72-acre site. These farmlands enabled Henry to put his sculptures in the open air so everyone can interact with them. He was inspired by nature and rocks, so this gave him great inspiration. This is The Seated Woman by Henry Moore. As you can see, it is quite an abstract piece. It clearly shows a woman, even though it doesn't have any human characteristics. To me, it seems quite a strong, powerful pose. The woman is seated looking outwards. She has quite voluptuous curves, showing a big form and sort of powerful. We can only tell it's a woman from the title almost, Seated Woman. We see what we assume are breasts and large hips, the feminine features on it. She also wears a skirt by the single indent on the front. It's quite a physical piece. Moore's left marks of his work all over, leaving a rough, jagged surface to the sculpture, showing a physical aspect. It's not as smooth as his other bronze work, almost like an unease, an unsettling feeling to the sculpture. We have to fight back the urge to touch and feel the rippling surface. Some might say that Moore's depiction of a woman here is unkind. She seems rounded and unflattering, but it shows some sort of importance. She sits rigidly, unmoving almost, staring at all who come to her, yet there's a softness to her, with the curves and undulating sides. To me, Moore tries to highlight women's power here. This is the reclining figure. Here we see a more feminine looking sculpture with a powerful looking thigh. We see Henry Moore sort of draping over here with the whole space here. Leave your eye around the sculpture. This adds a sort of movement around the sculpture as the head turns away. Interestingly, there seems to be less abstraction here. We see clear hands and feet and even two indents for the eyes and a bun of hair. This is Moore wanting to show his female form loud and clear. Her torso is distorted and narrowed, yet we can guess that her thighs are large to emphasise this motive of a powerful woman. It's as if she is in movement, about to get up, pushing on her legs. It's another reclining form which Moore was so taken by, and the earlier art which he would have seen at the British Museum. The Shackmole form we can see has influenced the sculpture, but he changes the male figure into a female one to show a more human and earthly image. This sculpture is a celebration of the feminine, made towards the end of his life. It's a dynamic sculpture with curves and waves that seem to suggest a landscape and a hillside, which Moore took inspiration from. Moore always wanted his sculpture to be seen in the round at 360 degrees. It's these curves that lead your eye around the sculpture, adding a sense of movement, leading us around the sculpture. So how did Henry Moore make these sculptures?
Well, firstly, he made maquettes, which are small models of his sculptures, seen here, making multiples of them sometimes to sell. He would make these with an armature of wood and wire, covering it in plaster. Even though he did this, Moore also made bronze maquettes to see what his final scale sculpture would look like. Most of his sculpture began to be cast in bronze after the war, although he hadn't stopped carving in wood and stone, as Moore always liked working like a carver, being hands-on. I was able to go to Tate Britain, which holds the largest Henry Moore collection in London. As an art historian, you have to look at what you see. So it might seem like it's just curves and shapes, and this doesn't make sense, but we can all see it's clearly a human figure, perhaps a woman. It's reclining and abstracted. It's supposed to be large and bulky. You can see what looks like arms and legs, as you can recognise key things like knees, torsos and arm shapes, with it reclining on elbows. But the more you look at it, you realise it's not an actual elbow. It's not really a head. It's a giant cavity in the middle, yet our mind makes these links. This sculpture is a dirty white. You can see the smoothness of the surface. This dirty ivory colour feels organic, like bone almost, a thing Moore was fascinated with, due to its function being practical and based on its shape. There's also these curvy forms contrasted with the linear lines on the sculpture. These linear lines help us make references to part of the body. For example, on the hand, a circular shape looks like a fist of fingers curled up in an abstracted way, like Moore is inviting us to fill in what he left out. Here we have a draped-seated figure. This figure was commissioned by a city in Germany. This style of drapery can be seen by Moore's drawings from the shelters in the war, and Greek sculptures from the Parthenon at the British Museum. With this in mind, we can see the Greek influence, and Moore positions the sculpture in quite an imposing way. Again, we can see a sort of power radiate from this woman, yet it's relaxed. To begin with, we see quite a realistic folds in the fabric. You get a real sense of a dress of some sort, all bunched up from the sitting sculpture, which flows down along the curves. The head is turned and the chest pushed forward, then the legs are bent away from the body, all adding a dynamic element to this sculpture. Again, we see typical Moore features like the simple facial features and small touches to show the gender of this sculpture. This woman's sculpture is relaxed. Her hand rests behind to support her weight, while the other rests gently by her side. Her legs don't support her, yet are resting as well. I think Moore is portraying the soft side of women, a contrasting idea compared to having the sculpture in a material as hard as bronze. This being said, there is still an element of power. The woman's shoulders are broad and proud as she looks out.
To me, Henry's works, even though they are abstract, present a view of a woman as a symbol of power while simultaneously being beautiful. Of course, these shapes would have all been inspired by rocks and other natural forms which Henry would have found on site in Perry Green. But the way he turns them into flowing forms of bronze, depicting the female curves, is stunning. In conclusion, to me, it would be hard to call these a true representation of the female form, as they are so abstracted. However, I think Moore's depiction is not that far off, representing the female form in its most stripped-down state, while still retaining important assets of what it means to be female, like power and calm and dominance, yet still being beautiful, something many feminists would be proud of.